Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi, and welcome to the 100th episode of the ISO Show. I'd just like to say it's been such an honour and a privilege to be able to record these podcasts and to be able to share the love of ISO standards at a global level. We've been absolutely blown away by the feedback that we've had on the podcast and also the number of countries where we have listeners. So it's absolutely fantastic that, you know, the global standards that we work with are reaching out and affecting organisations literally right across the globe. So I'd just like to thank all of our listeners that have not only listened to all of our episodes, we know that many of you have, but just for joining us, whether it's, you know, on an ad hoc basis, and hopefully you found something that's been useful. Because when I first started the podcast a couple of years ago, the whole point of it was really to dispel myths around ISO standards. So it's been a bit of a bugbear for me that businesses use ISO standards as a tick box exercise, and hopefully these podcasts have proved that actually if you go about implementing standards in the right way, it can be the antithesis of that. It's literally not a tick box exercise. It's all about continual improvement and creating systems for success. And looking at some of the podcasts that we've recorded, both interviews with some of our clients at Blackmores, which has been fantastic. We've had Morgan Sindel, Greater Anglia. We've had some fantastic clients that have volunteered their time to share their experiences. But also, I'm extremely grateful and thankful to members of our team who have shared their expertise on implementing ISO standards. So, yeah, long may it continue. There are so many standards that we haven't covered yet. We've got a great big long list of different standards that we do want to cover. And also we've got some interesting updates on migration to standards such as ISO 27001, the new standard that's going to be coming out later on this year in 2022. So if there are any particular topics or standards that you would like us to cover, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. So you can do that via our website on blackmoresuk.com. You can also reach out to us via the ISOlogy Hub website as well, which is our Netflix portal for ISO standard support. So yeah, please do get into contact with us if you'd like to hear about some other interesting standards that are out there. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in our guest, Rachel Churchman, who, if you've heard some of our podcasts, she's covered other topics such as business continuity and other standards. She is a standards guru here at Blackmores. But Rachel and I are going to be completely ripping to shreds management review. So for those of you that have had experience of management review and they may be a little bit dull now and lackluster and lacking some of the drive and motivation that a business needs for continued improvement, I hope that this episode is going to provide you with some food for thought because we're talking about the good, the bad and the ugly when it comes to management review. And Rachel's got some fantastic tips to really capitalise on the time that you spend in collating data for management review, chairing that meeting, and then taking those actions forward to help to take your business to the next level. I hope you enjoy the show.
Well, on the last two episodes, we've been talking all about management review. So the purpose of management review, how it can be used as a powerful tool to engage leadership and to review the performance of the business, and also about how to plan and facilitate and report on the findings and carry out actions in relation to management review. Now, this episode is purely for those ISO show listeners that are already certified to an ISO standard. You've been having a management review process and a management review meeting for many years, and it's just got really dull and boring, and it's not actually serving you. Now, we know that this can happen. This is quite a common thing. And hopefully this episode will help to inject some enthusiasm back into management review and be able to hopefully inspire you to thinking about management review in a different way and providing you with lots of hints and tips on how you can totally kick the ass out of your management review process. which could be really refreshing potentially for your business. And ultimately, the key purpose of doing that is to get more out of it for your business. So you want to be reviewing the effectiveness of your business performance, and they're the results that you really want to be getting out of this process, okay, to drive continual improvement, as we discussed in the previous episode. So I'm delighted to be joined by Rachel Churchman, who's Managing Consultant here at Blackmores. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Mel. Nice to be back. It's been a while.
Great to have you back. I was mentioning on the previous podcast that you've joined us on a few occasions on business continuity and some other interesting topics as well. Now, before we begin, we have got another couple of interesting guests, shall we say, that have been invited onto the podcast. If our social listeners hear a little bit of bird singing in the background, they're Rachel's budgies. So we've also got Bert and Dexter who are joining us for the podcast.
Yeah, apologies in advance.
No, actually, when we have meetings via Teams and that sort of thing, I do really enjoy it. It's quite relaxing, actually, quite soothing listening to Bert and Dexter in the background. So, welcome Bert and Dexter too. Okay, so management review. So one of the reasons for recording these podcasts on management review is that Rachel actually inspired me to do these podcasts based on a management review session that we had. It was probably about a month or two ago now, wasn't it, Rachel? It was the beginning of the year.
Yeah, about a month ago, yeah.
January, after our strategy day, because she did things quite differently. And that kind of inspired me to share this with you because I think, you don't need to be set in your ways and getting the same results that you've always had from your management review. There are different ways to approach it, and that's something that Rachel's going to be sharing some top tips on. So, Rachel, in your view, what would you say is the purpose of management review?
So for me, management review is for the business, not the assessor. Quite often, you will go into a business and you'll read a management review report and everything's perfect. Everything's on the up, everything's improving. They've not had any issues. There's nothing they can learn from as a business from their management review, and there's very few actions. And, whilst that might make everyone feel good that their management system is obviously absolutely perfect, they're not getting any value out of that management review process. And a bit of a top tip for anyone who gets assessed by Blackmores, if you like. We will always look at previous management review reports, and we won't just go back to the last one. We'll have a look at a couple of management review reports, because that will give us an indication of whether it's actually a bit of a cut and paste exercise. Has everyone actually been involved in the management review?
Which some companies are guilty of, aren't they, we find? Yes.
Absolutely, and you can really get a feel for it.
Yeah, we're like, this looks remarkably like last year's and the year before and the year before. And we're like, well, what's actually changed? What's going on in the business? Yeah.
Exactly, and it's a real shame because the companies are just leaving so many opportunities for improvement on the table just by not doing management review as designed. There's so many sort of hints and tips within the management review inputs that the standards prescribe themselves anyway that just aren't really being utilised by the business. The inputs, the first one on the agenda in any management standard is changes, internal and external issues. And quite often you can see that just kind of skimmed across. Oh yeah, there's been no changes in the business. We've not done anything. That's not really what the standards are looking for. And that's not really what the business is going to get any benefit from if they're just sort of thinking internally as to their processes. It's wanting them to really have a look at what's going on in the world. What's impacting their business externally, but also what's happening internally, and it's not just services we deliver, it's people, it's culture, it's how we work, it's where we work, which is quite topical after COVID. Once people or businesses start thinking a little bit out of the box just for that one input, they're going to suddenly see lots of changes in the business, lots of things that are changing around them that can present risks and opportunities to the business. I think that's where we started, Mel, in our management review. The first sort of question I asked was around, okay, so what's changed internally? What's changed externally? And we actually went and looked at our business risk register and started really sort of drilling down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And as a result, I think we added I think at that point we actually added 5 or 6 different new issues to our risk register for us to action, just as a result of that one question.
Yeah, that was right. And in fact, I'm happy to share with our audience, some of the topics that we did actually discuss and actions that were taken forward. So, let's run through our management review and what we actually covered, because I think sometimes it's useful for listeners to have some kind of context. So, if we're talking about internal and external issues, well, they might be thinking, well, we haven't really had any, but we had quite a few, didn't we?
Yeah, there was loads, but they were positive as well.
Yeah, I mean, but it was things like, we had an office move and there were certain issues associated with that, and still some issues going on with it at that time, because we'd literally only moved offices like about a week or two before, I think, the management review. But also we identified some single points of failure as well, like authorising or proofreading proposals and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, on the face of it, it didn't look that pretty, but this is real life. All businesses have risks and they're continuously being bombarded with certain risks and threats, aren't we? So I think the main thing is to talk about it, identify what we're going to do about it, and commit to that, take action and identify kind of key accountabilities for reducing those risks.
I think the important thing there, Mel, is it's not just highlighting the risks or highlighting the opportunities, but we actually had the open discussion involving the right people to actually work through, well, how are we going to learn from this, or what action are we going to take? And it meant that the management review was doing what it's meant to do, which is drive that improvement by having actual actions coming out.
Yeah, and quite often these are things that are outside of our control. So it's useful to bring those people together to decide on, well, this could be totally alien territory. How are we going to tackle this? So things that that are coming up, things that, I don't know, Windows 11 upgrades, we kind of made a note and discussed that, didn't we? And made a decision on what we were going to do and what we weren't going to do. But things like, what's happened with COVID, that was still a really topical issue, for our business, even in January 2022, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I'm seeing this with a lot of clients as well. COVID is still up there on the risk register, but rather than it being a risk, more and more now we're seeing in management review COVID being reflected as an opportunity, because the whole hybrid working has actually resulted in a positive coming out of a negative. And it's great to see that when that does appear in management review, and the actions that they're taking as a result of that in terms of flexible working for staff and positive changes they're making in their business.
Yeah, we discussed all sorts of, we basically had a bit of a brainstorming session on what the positive aspects were, didn't we? Which we hadn't done previously. So things like there were some positive aspects in terms of mental health as well. So people, who may have been working long hours travelling, and which could affect, family and other commitments, but also being more productive with time. We saw significant cost saving as a business as well, didn't we, which we captured, which obviously affects the bottom line as well.
Yeah, I mean, even little things that we talked about in terms of things like company subscriptions, that's something that probably wouldn't normally come up in a management review, but as you said, it's a cost to the bottom line of the business, and it was an opportunity that as a business we could take to just review, what we're using, how we're using it, looking at what we don't use anymore, and being quite sort of proactive. It's very similar to, I guess, if you've got ISO 27001, the information security standard, there's a process in there around access review, where a company will look at who's got access to what and whether it's still used. Similar approach, really. It's not something that's normally considered, but by doing a bit more of an internal review on risks and opportunities, that was something that sort of dropped out the bottom, that's actually probably going to save the company money.
Exactly, and it goes back to reviewing effectiveness, doesn't it? So, we've identified that we had a lot of subscriptions across different, professional bodies, and it's a case of saying, well, how is this serving us? How are we using this to make, what we do more effective as a professional services, consultancy firm? And if they're not serving us, then get rid of them. If it's not a hell yeah, then it's a no.
Exactly.
And that, obviously that did result in cost savings. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think, you've got to look at the ROI on any investment within a business, haven't you? Whether it's training, what are we going to get back from that as an organisation, as well as the individuals, and how's that going to affect our future strategy for growth?
Yeah, and I think, and this is where, just looking at the internal and external issues really kind of gives everyone in the business an opportunity to voice these issues. And I guess that also comes down to getting the right people involved in management review, because in order to sort of discuss the issues and understand the issues in the business, you need those voices from your business. You need them to be able to feed back into management review. So I think what was different maybe this time for us is we involved more people in the management review, and that actually meant that we discussed more issues and we unearthed more opportunities for improvement as a result, rather than having the same people in the management review the whole time. You're going to get the same opinions the whole time.
Yeah. So that's another way of kind of refreshing it, isn't it, really? And refreshing that process by getting different views, inputs and data as well. So I think this time round we had data on renewals, and we could see that there were some inefficiencies within our process. And so we looked at ways that we could pull together and spread out responsibilities and improve the process. But it was only kind of looking at the data that it enabled us to see, what we could do to make improvements there, and how we could potentially alleviate any future issues, because we tend to have a lot of renewals at the end of the year, don't we?
Yeah, they all come at once,
which can be a huge administrative burden, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that we're serving our clients in the best way, because we could be having quarterly touch points with clients throughout the year to save that huge kind of task at the end of the year. That then can lead to better customer service as well throughout the year.
I think data analysis, Mel, is key to management review, because you don't know what you don't know sometimes. I mean, we've been really fortunate in Blackmores over the last 18 months, year, to use our new Monday system that is really, and I mean, most companies will have a CRM or some kind of, even if it's spreadsheets, they'll have some kind of business intelligence information. But are they using it for management review? Are they really getting that data from the right people and using it in management review? Because by getting the right data and analysing it and asking questions around that data, is it what we're expecting? Why is this the case? If there's a trend, whether that's positive or negative, why is there this trend? How can we improve? What lessons can we learn? You can't ask those questions and take actions unless you've got the right data. So you need to consider, what are you as a business monitoring and measuring? What are you concerned with understanding about your business? And is that information coming into management review? And ultimately then, are the right decision makers asking the right questions around that data to be able to make those decisions, big decisions sometimes, that are going to improve the business and drive that continual improvement? And it's getting that data at the right point in time as well, I find. And, as a consultant, I'll put my hand up, we've been guilty of this as well. Sometimes if you've just got a day to do management review with a client, that's not the most effective way of having or, running the management review process, because a day, when you break it down, doesn't give you an awful lot of time to gather the right information, make sense of that information and do that sort of initial analysis, to then be able to present that within a management review, either presentation or meeting, or however you're going to run your management review process. And it also doesn't give the to people taking part in management review enough time to digest that information before having to make sometimes big decisions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you and I like to have our information in our data well before a meeting so that we can make decisions on certain things, don't we? And because otherwise you're kind of showing up to a meeting blind in many respects, aren't you? And you're kind of put on the spot, and you might want to go away and have a think about certain things or get more information in order to be able to make those decisions.
Absolutely. And I think that's a lesson that I've learned over the years, and that, hopefully we help our clients with as well, in terms of warming them up for management review well in advance, so that they are getting the information and pulling it together and analysing it, so that ultimately that management review itself becomes value add rather than sort of knee-jerk decision making. I think that's really important. And if there's one takeaway, I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, for example, for this year, we had our cancellations data, didn't we, in advance, so we could have a look at the reasons for cancellations, what that was costing the business. So at the meeting, we could look at potential trends and preventative action as well for, trying to put in place some controls within our processes, and also improve on communications to try and reduce the number of cancellations.
Yeah, and they were sort of, fact-based decision making, because we had everything available to us. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I just feel that the management review is the opportunity to sort of question the status quo, and it's not just about reporting as is, but it's getting under the skin of that data and looking to question it a bit more, definitely.
Yeah, and a good example of that is customer satisfaction. So some organisations might struggle to get customer satisfaction information, but obviously there are lots of different ways, if you think outside the box, that you could get it, whether that's through key account meetings or net promoter scores. And there might be other areas within the business that are getting data on customer satisfaction, but you don't have access to them. So I think it goes back to the point that you made earlier, that it involving all relevant people and data to contribute to the inputs that are needed for management review.
Yeah, and that also is another thing that I find needs to be considered, is not just the inputs but the outputs as well. I don't know what businesses do with their management review reports, whether that is to keep it at a high strategic level, or whether they share that information in the business. Because in Blackmores, we're transparent with our management review. Our management review is available to everybody in the business, and even if they've not been personally at the review meeting that we had, or the review workshops that we have, they can still see what was discussed. They can still see the part they play in the management system and in the management review results. They can see what's discussed and the actions, and everyone's invited to have a voice and to feedback on that management review report. And I think that's also really important. Sometimes people just do the management review because they have to. They get it over and done with. They've got a report, they've got a presentation, they've got something to show the assessor, yeah, we've done management review. And there might be some actions that are taken forward by the management team, but how often is it shared wider in the organisation so that everyone can understand why these decisions have been made, how it affects them, and also how they can help in achieving some of the improvement actions that come out of management review. So I think that's another thing that can really re-engage the business.
Yeah, and I think would you say that identifying what's important for your business in terms of what is it that you want to be monitoring and measuring, because obviously each business is different, and I know that in terms of monitoring and measurement, you could just put what you think is needed for the standard as opposed to what your business needs to monitor and measure. What are the areas that you've seen businesses monitor and measure, and kind of review the output of that and management review that's really helped kind of take their business to the next level?
It's a good question, because every business is different, and I think the most effective management reviews that I've seen or been part of have been where the monitoring and measuring has been very much business-led, not standard-led. So obviously we support companies with lots of different standards. So obvious ones, let's take ISO 14001, for instance, quite an obvious one, environmental standard. So they're monitoring things like how much waste are we creating? How much water are we using? How much electricity are we using? Is it going up? Is it going down? These are typical metrics that they feel they should be monitoring because it's an environmental standard and that can be directly attributed to environmental performance. But actually, they're not weighting it against anything. It's just pure metrics. The fact that they've moved office, they've employed, 13 more people. Yes, they're going to be using more electricity because they've got more devices, more people, and it's understanding the data they've got and how they're using it. But more than that, the better management reviews I've seen in this area is where they've taken a step back and said, right, what are we concerned with from an environmental perspective? And it's where they're perhaps monitoring sustainability or carbon footprint or the performance of their supply chain from a sustainability point of view, where they're looking at the training or the culture and the staff feedback in terms of environmental performance. Those kinds of things are more relative to that client, that business, and what they feel is going to drive environmental improvements in their business that might not necessarily be your typical expectations in terms of, a key metric or a KPI for environmental performance. So it's very much, as you say, looking at, well, what are we interested in as a business? What do we want to improve? And it might be related to their products and services. It might be related to the culture of their business. It might be related to their key customers or industries or areas they want to be moving into and growing into as a business. Rather than the obvious, how much training have we done? Has everyone had an induction? The usual easy measurements. I guess that's a bit of a sticking point, isn't it? That sometimes if it's easy to measure, then we'll just use that because we're doing it anyway. It's easy to measure. But they're not getting any value from it. What decisions can they make from that? What can they learn from that? Whereas if they start to dig around a little bit into things that are going to actually move them in the right direction, help them grow, understand their business and their customers better, they're the sorts of things they want to be thinking about. Well, how can we measure that? How can we monitor that?
Yeah, that's a great point because, some businesses might include, sales won or new leads and conversions and that sort of thing. So looking at business growth, which obviously all businesses do need to grow, but some of the things that might not be that easy or, might not be that pretty is looking at attrition. So how many customers have you lost and why is that? And sometimes these are difficult questions to ask, aren't they? Like you say, don't always go for the easy data. Although, I'd love to be able to say that, make management review easier. But actually, it's asking some of those difficult questions that get the results that you might not want to hear them, but actually for the business health, you do. And you need to be talking about, these serious issues that will help you to progress. And again, it comes back to continual improvement, doesn't it? I mean, what's the point in reviewing what you're doing if you're going to say that everything's hunky-dory and tickety-boo, when actually, you're just brushing under the carpet some of the really critical issues that might be going on within the organisation that you do actually need to, man up and actually talk about them and make decisions on them. Otherwise, they're not going to go away, are they?
There's always an elephant in the room. Always an elephant in the room, Mel, and that's what you should be discussing and talking about at management review is, making sure if there are issues or there are areas where you're not doing as well as you think you should be or as well as your competitors are or as your customers are expecting from you. That's what you should be monitoring and measuring. That's what you should be analysing and asking those probing questions about in management review. And that's where you should be making those decisions to improve that and take the business forward. And that's what it's all about. That's what management review is designed for. It's the good, the bad and the ugly. It's not all the good. You want to sort of really poke the bad and ugly as well.
Yeah. In fact, what we've introduced at Blackmores is a bugs meeting, haven't we? We have a monthly team meeting which you could say that some elements of that are covered from the inputs in management review. But we've now introduced a bugs meeting, which is like a lessons learned, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, I think that is good, bad and ugly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just in a different order.
Yeah, because it's about coming together and, lessons learned and how we can improve and working together as a team to kind of, work on certain ideas and suggestions and sharing, intel on what's worked really, really well, Anyway, just moving on to objectives, because obviously that's one of the areas that's reviewed at management review. What's your recommendation on reviewing objectives? Because some companies will just cover this once a year in a management review. I mean, what's your view on that, Rachel? And what have you seen in your experience that's been really effective when it comes to management of objectives and reviewing them?
Okay, so the easy thing to do, the easy path to take, if you like, is just look at the objectives. Have we done better this year than last? Yes, tick, great, move on. That's not really helping very much. I think when it comes to objectives, it's looking at each of the objectives and looking at the program measures, what's the steps that have actually been taken in the year and what that's driven in terms of improvement, what's worked, what hasn't worked. But it's also an opportunity to take a little bit of a step back at management review and say, actually, is this still relevant? This objective, is this still what we want to do as a business? Because sometimes, you can see objectives, and this goes back to me talking about, as an assessor and as an auditor, looking at the last 3 or 4 management review reports. You go back in some companies and they've had the same, and I mean literally the same objectives for years, with very, very little progress year to year, very, 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 gradual progress. And it makes you ask the question, well, what value? What are you getting out of these objectives? Because you're not changing them. You're not really progressing. You're not seeing the improvements that you anticipated right at the start. Is that because they're just not the right objectives for you? Are you focusing in the right areas? But you need to be asking those questions at management review and being honest with yourself as a business to say, are we getting what we hoped from these objectives? Because if you're not, that's when you need to go back to all of the sort of risks and opportunities you've probably discussed and raised in your management review and look to see whether actually there's some better objectives, some quicker wins that you could develop for objectives for your management system. You don't have to stay with the same objectives. If they're not working and they're not progressing, then they're not delivering value.
Yeah, they've got to help the business to move forward, haven't they? And I think just reviewing them once a year, I know that we were guilty of this a few years ago. It's just not really good enough. So, and now we've broken this down into KPIs and we review them as a leadership team, don't we, on a quarterly basis. We pick up on some of the objectives at our monthly team meeting, but we even get as granular as reviewing them on a weekly basis in some areas where we know that the work that we're doing each week is helping to shift the needle in the right direction in terms of where we're heading. So I think ultimately there's no right or wrong way of reviewing progress against your objectives. I think it's what suits a business culture, isn't it?
It is, and it's just making sure you are seeing improvement as a result of your objectives and being brave enough to be the one to sort of put your hand up and say if something's not improving or not moving or not getting done, actually saying, do you know what, is this something we still want to be doing? Because there's nothing in the standard that says you have to finish an objective and achieve it 100%, because if ultimately it's not working or not driving improvement in the business, you're better off focusing on something that is going to deliver that for your business. And I think it's about being honest with yourself as a business as to what you want to be focusing on in terms of improvement and what you don't need to be focusing on. Even if you thought, 2 years ago it was going to change the world for you, 2 years down the line and nothing started, then you want to refocus.
Yeah. So I think just another area that I'd like to touch on, because I can remember seeing management review reports and non-conformities, obviously as an agenda item was on there, and it would just say 2 non-conformities or no non-conformities, which doesn't really tell us much at all. Yeah, what do you think that is the best approach to dealing with non-conformities and corrective action at management review?
Drains up, absolutely, 100% take the drains up approach.
I like that phrase, drains up.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's for
even Bert and Dexter in the background are enjoying that one.
If you can hand on heart say you've had no non-conformities in your business, raised either through internal audit or otherwise, it doesn't all have to come through internal audit. Non-conformities can be raised at any time by anybody in the business. Then I think you're probably lying, to be fair. There's always issues.
You're lying to yourself, aren't you? It's bullshit. No, there isn't. I'm not being, let's not beat about the bush, Rachel. There isn't any business that doesn't have some type of non-conformity that happens within the year. There isn't, is there?
Exactly. To err is human. Some things happen, absolutely. But the important is recognising the fact they do happen. It's bringing them to the surface at management review, because there might be trends. You might be playing whack-a-mole with your issues in the business. You think you fixed it here and you smack the mole on the head over here, and then all of a sudden it will pop up in another area of the business. You haven't fixed it. You haven't got to the root cause. And it's only by bringing it all to the table at management review and looking at it holistically, you can start to see those trends where you think you've fixed things and actually it hasn't. And you can start to take bigger actions, make bigger decisions as to how are we going to tackle this? What do we need to do? What have we learned from this? Sometimes it might be that you can learn from the actions you have taken to treat a non-conformity. And it might be the actions you've taken in that area could actually then be transferred to somewhere else in the business and improve things that might be going slightly sideways somewhere else in the business. But you're not going to get that value unless you're honest with yourself at management review and bring them all to the table and actually say, right, this is what's gone wrong, or these are the issues we've had this year. This is what we've done to deal with them. This has worked. This kind of worked, and this didn't work. And then you can start to actually take positive action as a result and make positive changes. So yeah, when I always, as an auditor, if I read a management review and there's no non-conformities raised or no issues discussed, it's a flag. A flag that the management review is maybe not being as searching or as effective as it can be.
Yeah. And what about resources as well? Because again, this is something that can get overlooked. And sometimes this is because there's just a lack of understanding about what you could be reviewing in terms of resources. Let's have a look at the Blackmores one that we did. When we looked at new recruits, so we looked at people, we looked at our office move, systems and software, CPD and training. So yeah, we looked at what are the things that you need to run your business effectively.
Yeah, I think one that we didn't cover, and maybe that's a failing on our part, but a resource that's often overlooked is time. And time is a massively valuable resource. That's something you don't often see covered in management review under resources, but how effectively are people using their time?
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
Do people have enough time to do everything effectively?
Yeah, I mean, that could cut across so many things, couldn't it, Rach? I think, sorry, I'm just kind of making a mental note of this for our next one. But it could come across as, like, say, for example, we've got objectives to do certain activities. You need to allow time to do those, don't you? If it's not kind of business as usual, if these are new projects, new initiatives, that's a good example. And another one is, in terms of how are we managing our capacity in terms of our time? How many hours are we spending on X particular task? Is it enough?
And I mean, we do keep a very tight eye on capacity, and we've got a dedicated service delivery manager who does monitor that. But that's where that's an example of an input maybe that we missed in our management review. Was there feedback perhaps from Carly that around capacity and time, and have we got enough? Have people got enough? Are we getting feedback from the business in terms of time constraints or issues? But as you say, it's other things like the right people, the right software, the right equipment, it's the right work environment. There's a lot that comes under resources. It's not just having the right number of staff. It's wider than that. Have we got the right type of staff or competence of staff? Have we got access to external resource when we need it? So it's not necessarily just internal resource, but external resource that you might be using as well.
Yeah, and this is where it kind of interlinks with your internal and external issues that you're talking about at the very beginning of the management review, because I know that this year we looked at, we know that there is a skills shortage within our profession, for qualified, experienced consultants. But I think recruitment is an issue across all industries. We're seeing it with construction clients, and it's right across the board. So we made an executive decision to grow our own talent, didn't we? And that's one of our objectives, is creating our own learner pathway for career progression here at Blackmores as a consultant. And that I think being able to again take a step back from the business as a team to look at what decisions we need to make in order to address these external issues that have an effect on us internally.
And I guess it's seeing that golden thread through the management review report, isn't it? Starting with the external and internal issues right at the top. You should then hopefully be able to see that golden thread running through the report that sort of demonstrates how you're monitoring it, how you're measuring it, what issues have occurred that could come back and be related to some of those issues. What objectives are you setting to improve things moving forward? It should all align and flow. The management review shouldn't just sort of be looking at little chunks of information in isolation. There should be a story running through your management review that starts with those internal, external issues.
Exactly. So if you're looking at, reviewing your pestle once a year, one of the aspects is technical, isn't it? And that's kind of then weaved into our opportunities. So last year we introduced like Monday.com using Loom, and many of these tools have accelerated the way that we work in terms of communications and productivity. But then sometimes, you do need to take a step back to see what's working well and what isn't working well, and to address them moving forward. Because I think, it's all well and good, downloading apps and new technology, and quite often they come at a cost. And again, it's looking at what the ROI is on that for the business. But I think obviously we've covered some of the areas that are typically in a management review, but just fine. I know I could obviously we can carry on talking about other agenda items, but if you could leave us with 3 top tips, Rachel, what would they be on management review?
Okay, 3 top tips. Probably the one that I've already covered a little bit earlier on but most important is prepare well. I think if there's anything for anyone to take away, it's don't rush your management review. Management review is critical to continual improvement. It's where the big decisions get made. So don't rush it. Get the right data. Ask the right people for the right data. Analyse the data and present it well in management review. So make sure that the people making the decisions are basing it on fact. You need to gather the right information, and you need to be making sure that it's for the business and not for the assessor. So make sure it's the information and the data that you're presenting is, what the business needs to be concerned with and needs to review and improve upon. My next top tip would be involve the right people. So when I'm talking about involving the right people, I don't mean having a really, really expensive meeting with every director and every manager, in a room for, 4 hours. That's just a really expensive meeting. That's not a productive management review. And it doesn't have to be a meeting anyway. Management review is a process. What I mean by involving the right people is it comes back to getting the right information. You need the right data and information coming from all areas of the business, and to do that you need to engage with people across the business to understand and get that information. But you do also need decision makers involved in the management review process, because at the end of the day an effective management review is going to have lots of actions and lots of decisions that need to be made in the business, and you need decision makers to be able to authorise and approve and be in agreement and support those big decisions. And as I say, involving the right people. Don't be scared to cover the good, the bad and the ugly. Just because you've got the CEO sitting at the table, he doesn't want a yes man type management review report. He wants to know what's going on in the business. So the good, the bad and the ugly is going to be a far more effective management review for a CEO than a report that just tells him that everything's perfect. That's not going to work. And the last one is, use the report to drive improvement, or use the management review process to drive improvement. I can't tell you how often I've been to clients, big and small, where management review is held annually, and the actions from the last management review held 12 months ago suddenly get reviewed at the next management review, and guess what? No one's done anything because the actions haven't been taken forward effectively into the business. So if we're going to take the time to make these big decisions and agree these actions, we need to make sure that those are taken forward in the business and progressed. So Mel, as you said, quite a lot of businesses will have management meetings monthly, or they might have quarterly, board meetings. Everything that comes out of the management review should then be followed through and followed up, so that we don't get to the situation where a year later nothing's moved and nothing's happened.
Yeah, it's just a waste of time then, isn't it, really? Then, you're thinking, what's the point? I think if you're reviewing it more regularly and, like you say, working to drive continuous improvement, it's a more dynamic process, isn't it?
Yeah.
As opposed to a static meeting in minutes. Makes it so much more dynamic. Yeah, no, I like that one.
It also means it means something in the business, because if people know that decision came out of management review, and guess what, 3 or 4 months down the line we've done it and we're seeing improvements, it makes the management review have more value. The management review itself suddenly becomes a more valuable process in the business. If nothing happens between one management review and the next, it doesn't hold that weight, doesn't hold that value in the eyes of the business. So it's important that everything that drops out at the bottom of management review gets progressed and gets managed. So they're my top tips.
Lovely. No, they're brilliant. So just to summarise those top tips, because they were awesome. So number 1 was prepare well. Remember, it's for the benefit of the business, not the certification body that you're doing it for. Number 2, involve the right people, representing all relevant areas of the business. And number 3, use management review to drive continual improvement. And if that means doing it in a more dynamic way, on a more regular basis that suits your business culture and the way that you operate, do it. Don't be scared. Cool. And just finally, so if you had some advice on kind of the 3 ways to conduct a management review, so we've kind of touched on different ways, what would you say are the kind of the 3 main ways then for management review?
Okay, I mean, I'll start with the traditional, which is a meeting, which I think a lot of companies are probably quite familiar with, because it's an easy way of getting the right people in the room, if you like, to go through the management review. That's fine if you're going to use a meeting, but that comes back to the preparing well. A meeting is only going to be effective if you've gathered the right data, analysed it, presented it, and circulated a report well in advance of that meeting. That's the only way you're going to really get value out of that meeting, because people are going to come prepared with opinions, with feedback and with suggestions, and ready to make decisions. If you spring it on them on the day, give them a report and expect them to make decisions on the day, you're not going to get the value out of that. So a meeting is one way. Another way is, I've seen this a lot through lockdown actually, is to have a presentation. So that makes management review more visually appealing. You can highlight certain areas you want them to focus on. It should still be supported by that report, circulated in advance. And so you still don't want to just spring a presentation on them. You still want to give them all the background information. But a presentation could be a good way that you can capture people that might not be present. Global companies that have different time zones, if you record your presentation, for instance, if you run it through Teams, then all of a sudden that makes it more accessible to more decision makers, and it means that they can access that at a time that they're ready for management review, not when they're just rushing from one meeting for another meeting. So presentations are good. And another one, which again I'm seeing more often, is using your existing forums in your business. And this goes back to also following up on actions. So you can carve up the management review inputs over a year if you wanted to. There's nothing in the standard that says, you have to do it all at once. So over a 12-month period, you might decide that there's certain inputs that you'll cover every meeting, or every month or every quarter, and then other areas you might just cover once in a year. So you might have management meetings, you might have board meetings, you might have staff meetings. These are all existing meetings that are going to happen anyway. So you're not going to have to try and round people up for these meetings because it's already in their diary. But you can utilise these to cover management review inputs. And then what you can do is then take the outputs and take everything from those meetings and summarise it in an end of year report. So you're still getting that full report with all inputs, all outputs, but you might have covered it over the year. They're the three sort of ways to conduct it. But my last little takeaway would be, do consider how you communicate it in the business as well. Do consider what you do with that report once it's finalised with all of those actions. Should you just be keeping it at a high level, or is there areas in there that you might want to be sharing with your internal stakeholders? I think there's value to be had there.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. I know obviously we could have covered some other agenda items that are typically in a management review as well, but I was really pleased that we touched on some of them because you provided some golden nuggets in there. So yeah, thank you very much for your time today, Rachel. I appreciate that. No
worries.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us. And also thank you for Bert and Dexter in the background.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, actually, it's been quite pleasant, actually. Yeah, it feels like we're in a garden somewhere, so that's quite nice as opposed to in an office. So yeah, thanks so much, Rachel. I really appreciate that input, and yeah, that's been really interesting conversation to kind of dig a bit deeper into management review and hopefully dispel a few myths around management review. And for our ISO show listeners, if you've had any kind of aha moments in there and thought, oh yeah, actually I wouldn't mind trying that, or that's a great tip, Rachel, thank you so much for that, please do leave us with a comment. We love to get that feedback because that does help us to helps us to reach a wider audience by you leaving comments, and also that does help to shape future podcasts as well and what you'd like to hear in the future. And guests that we can have on again as well in the future, because I know that Rachel's definitely going to be back again soon. So thanks very much for joining us today, Rachel. And thanks very much for joining us on the ISO show today. And if you want to find out a little bit more about management review and also some templates and documents that you can use and training, Rachel's actually covered some modules, and I have as well, over on the ISology Hub. So you can find that on www.isologyhub.com. Or if you want to find out a bit more about our services on the Blackmores website, if you'd like Rachel or one of our other consultants to come in and to chair a management review for you, so you can see how Rachel does her thing, which is totally kind of reinvigorated our management review, which is cool. I'm not saying it wasn't great before, it was just a different way of doing it, which is cool. Then we have services that you can get access to via the Blackmores website as well. So that's www.blackmoresuk.com. So thanks very much for joining us today, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.